Lindsay shivered as she stepped out of her car, the rain pounding relentlessly against the pavement. She had parked a few blocks away from her apartment building, unable to find a closer spot in the overcrowded city streets. Pulling her coat tighter around her, she began the wet, cold trek home. The storm had come out of nowhere, catching everyone by surprise. The sky was a swirling mass of dark clouds, occasionally illuminated by flashes of lightning. Thunder rumbled ominously in the distance. Lindsay glanced around nervously, feeling unusually on edge. As she hurried along the deserted sidewalk, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She quickened her pace, her footsteps echoing in the empty street. The sound of the rain was deafening, drowning out everything else. She glanced over her shoulder, but saw nothing except the sheets of rain cascading down. She was almost at her building when she heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind her. Lindsay's heart raced. She turned her head again, but the rain made it impossible to see clearly. The footsteps stopped when she did, sending a chill down her spine. Lindsay reached the front door of her building and fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking. She finally managed to unlock the door and hurried inside, slamming it shut behind her. She leaned against it, breathing heavily, trying to calm her racing heart. The lobby was eerily silent. The old building had seen better days. The walls were cracked, and the paint was peeling. The flickering light bulb overhead cast long shadows, making the place feel even more sinister. Lindsay glanced around, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. She took the elevator to her floor, her nerves still on edge. As she stepped out into the dimly lit hallway, she heard a door creak open behind her. She spun around, but saw nothing. The hallway was empty. Lindsay hurried to her apartment and quickly locked the door behind her. She let out a sigh of relief and leaned against the door, trying to shake off the feeling of dread that had been building inside her. She was safe now, she told herself. She was home. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. She walked over to the window and peered out into the rain-soaked street below. There was no one there, just the rain and the dark, empty street. She turned away from the window and tried to distract herself by making a cup of tea. As she waited for the water to boil, she heard a faint tapping sound. She froze, straining to listen. The tapping continued, rhythmic and persistent. It was coming from the living room. Lindsay's heart pounded as she walked towards the sound. She flicked on the light and saw the window. Someone had written on the fog-up glass from the outside, "Hello." Lindsay's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the word, her mind racing. How was that possible? She was several floors up. No one could have reached her window without a ladder. And even then, why would anyone do that in the middle of a storm? Her phone buzzed, startling her. She grabbed it and saw a message from an unknown number. "Did you like my message?" Lindsay's hands trembled as she typed a reply. "Who is this?" The response was almost immediate. "A friend." Lindsay's heart pounded. She looked around her apartment, suddenly feeling very vulnerable. She checked the locks on her windows and doors, making sure everything was secure. She needed to call the police, she thought. But before she could, another message came through. "Don't bother. I'm already inside." Lindsay's blood ran cold. Her mind raced, desperately trying to comprehend the message. How could someone be inside? She had checked the locks, and everything was secure. She glanced around the apartment, her eyes darting from corner to corner, searching for any sign of an intruder. Her phone buzzed again. "Look behind you." Lindsay's heart pounded as she slowly turned around. The apartment was silent except for the sound of the rain beating against the windows. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on the closet door. It was slightly ajar. Summoning every ounce of courage, she walked towards the closet. Her hand shook as she reached out to open the door fully. She took a deep breath and yanked it open. Empty. She let out a shaky breath, relief washing over her, but it was short-lived. Her phone buzzed again. "Nice try. Check the bathroom." Lindsay's fear surged anew. She crept towards the bathroom, her footsteps silent on the carpeted floor. She pushed the door open, the hinge creaking softly. The bathroom was dimly lit, the shadows making it hard to see clearly. She flicked on the light. Nothing. She was about to step back when she noticed something on the mirror. Written in the steam from her earlier shower were the words, "I see you." Lindsay's scream caught in her throat. She stumbled back, her phone slipping from her grasp and clattering to the floor. She ran to the front door, her hands fumbling with the lock. She had to get out. She had to get help. As she wrenched the door open, she nearly collided with her neighbor, Mrs. Green, a kind elderly woman who lived down the hall. "Lindsay, dear, what's wrong?" Mrs. Green asked, concern etched on her face. "Someone's in my apartment," Lindsay gasped. "They sent me messages, wrote on my windows and mirror. I need to call the police." Mrs. Green nodded, her eyes wide. "Come, let's go to my apartment. We can call from there." Lindsay followed Mrs. Green down the hall, glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see someone following her. They reached Mrs. Green's apartment, and the old woman quickly ushered Lindsay inside, locking the door behind them. Mrs. Green handed Lindsay her phone. "Here, call 911. With trembling hands, Lindsay dialed the number. As she explained the situation to the dispatcher, she felt a small measure of relief. Help was on the way. Minutes later, the sound of sirens filled the air. Lindsay and Mrs. Green waited anxiously by the door until there was a knock. "It's the police," a voice called from the other side. Mrs. Green opened the door, and two officers stepped inside. Lindsay quickly recounted her experience, showing them the messages on her phone. The officers checked Lindsay's apartment thoroughly, but found no sign of forced entry and no one inside. They took her statement and promised to increase patrols in the area, but there was little else they could do. After the officers left, Lindsay felt a heavy weight of exhaustion settle over her. Mrs. Green offered to let her stay the night, but Lindsay declined, wanting the comfort of her own bed, despite the fear lingering in her mind. She thanked Mrs. Green and returned to her apartment. It was eerily quiet, the only sound the steady rhythm of the rain. She double-checked the locks on her windows and doors before collapsing onto her bed. Her phone buzzed once more. She hesitated, then picked it up, dreading what she might see. "Sweet dreams, Lindsay." She dropped the phone, her pulse racing. The rain continued to fall outside, each drop a reminder of the terror she couldn't escape. Lindsay lay awake, eyes wide open, heart pounding, waiting for the dawn to bring some semblance of safety. As the first light of morning crept into her apartment, Lindsay knew she had to find a way to reclaim her peace. But for now, the only thing she could do was endure, hoping the nightmare would end with the rain. Harold sat alone in his dimly lit living room, the rhythmic patter of rain on the window a constant background to his thoughts. The storm had rolled in swiftly, dark clouds blotting out the last remnants of daylight. Lightning occasionally illuminated the room, casting eerie shadows that danced on the walls. It had been a long day at work, and Harold was looking forward to a quiet evening at home. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid glinting in the brief flashes of lightning. The rain grew heavier, pounding against the windows with increasing ferocity. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, a sense of unease settling in his chest. As he sipped his drink, Harold's phone buzzed on the coffee table. He picked it up, squinting at the screen. A message from an unknown number. "Are you alone?" Harold frowned, his heart rate quickening. He considered ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of him. "Who is this?" he typed back, his fingers trembling slightly. A few moments later, the phone buzzed again. "I'm watching you." Harold's eyes darted around the room, his pulse racing. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a prank or a wrong number. But something about the message sent chills down his spine. He got up and checked all the doors and windows, making sure they were locked. The rain was now a relentless torrent, thunder rumbling ominously in the distance. His phone buzzed again. "Don't bother. You can't hide." Harold's breath caught in his throat. He looked out the window, but the sheets of rain made it impossible to see anything. He grabbed a kitchen knife, his only means of defense, and backed into the corner of the living room, his eyes darting between the windows and the front door. The power suddenly went out, plunging the house into darkness. Harold's heart pounded in his ears as he fumbled for his phone, using the screen's glow to navigate. He turned on the flashlight and moved cautiously through the house, the beam cutting through the darkness. As he reached the hallway, the sound of a window shattering in the back of the house made him jump. Harold spun around, knife raised, as he tried to peer through the darkness. His phone buzzed again. "I'm inside." He swallowed hard, his throat dry. Harold forced himself to move, creeping towards the source of the noise. He could hear the rain pouring in through the broken window, the wind howling through the gap. He reached the kitchen and found the shattered window, glass littering the floor. He scanned the room, the beam of light trembling as his hand shook. Then he saw it, a muddy footprint on the linoleum floor. Harold's stomach dropped. Someone had definitely broken in. He turned to check the rest of the house, every creak of the floorboards making him jump. As he reached the bedroom, he noticed the closet door was ajar. His phone buzzed again. Almost there. Harold's breath was ragged, panic setting in. He edged towards the closet, knife in hand, and with a quick motion, yanked the door open. The closet was empty, clothes hanging undisturbed. He turned to leave, but a sudden movement caught his eye. A shadow darting past the bedroom door. Harold spun around, his flashlight beam catching the glimpse of a figure disappearing into the darkness. He chased after it, heart pounding, down the hallway and into the living room. He stopped, panting, the knife clutched tightly in his hand. "Show yourself," he shouted, the words echoing in the silent house. The only response was the relentless rain hammering against the windows and the distant roll of thunder. Harold stood there, adrenaline coursing through his veins, every nerve on edge. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that whoever had sent those messages was still in the house, lurking in the shadows. Harold knew he had to get out, had to find help. But the storm outside was fierce, and he had no idea what or who might be waiting for him if he dared to venture out into the night. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, and made his way towards the front door, determined to escape whatever nightmare had found him on this rainy night. Harold reached the front door and hesitated, listening for any sound over the roar of the storm. His hand shook as he turned the lock and slowly opened the door. The wind whipped rain into his face, cold and biting. He stepped out onto the porch, scanning the darkened street. There was no sign of anyone. He quickly closed the door behind him, his pulse still racing. He ran down the steps and across the yard, the rain soaking him to the bone. His first thought was to head to his neighbor's house, just a few yards away. Harold reached their porch, banged on the door, and rang the bell. No answer. He glanced around, feeling exposed and vulnerable. The entire neighborhood seemed deserted, the storm keeping everyone indoors. Harold's phone buzzed again. He pulled it out with trembling hands. "You can't run from me." A flash of lightning illuminated the street, and for a split second, he saw a figure standing under a tree a few houses down. The figure was watching him. Harold's blood ran cold. He turned and sprinted down the street, the knife still clutched in his hand. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to get away. As he ran, he could hear footsteps behind him, splashing through the puddles. Harold pushed himself harder, lungs burning, legs aching. He turned a corner and ducked into an alley, hoping to lose his pursuer. He pressed himself against the wall, trying to catch his breath, the rain pouring down in relentless sheets. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Harold's mind raced, searching for an escape. He spotted a fire escape ladder hanging just within reach. With a desperate leap, he grabbed it and pulled himself up, the metal cold and slippery beneath his hands. He climbed to the roof, the wind howling around him. He crouched behind an air conditioning unit, trying to stay hidden. The footsteps echoed below, then stopped. Harold dared to peek over the edge of the roof. The figure was standing in the alley, looking around. Lightning flashed again, and he saw the face, pale, expressionless, with dark eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. The figure looked up, directly at him. Harold's heart leaped into his throat. He backed away, crawling across the rooftop, searching for another way down. He spotted a neighboring building close enough to jump to. With a running start, he leaped across the gap, barely making it. He scrambled to his feet and continued running. Harold reached the edge of the roof and looked down. It was a 2-story drop to the ground. He had no choice. He climbed over the edge and dangled for a moment before letting go. He landed hard, pain shooting through his ankle, but he forced himself to keep moving. He stumbled into another alley, trying to stay hidden in the shadows. His phone buzzed again. You can't hide forever. Harold's fear turned to anger. He was tired of being hunted, tired of the relentless pursuit. He decided to turn the tables. He looked around for something he could use and spotted a broken piece of metal pipe. He picked it up, the weight comforting in his hand. He moved quietly through the alley, backtracking towards where he had seen the figure last. He was going to confront this stalker, end this nightmare once and for all. Harold's mind was focused, his fear giving way to determination. As he approached the spot where he had last seen the figure, he slowed his pace, listening. The rain had lessened slightly, the storm beginning to move on. He heard a faint rustling ahead. Harold tightened his grip on the pipe and moved forward. He turned a corner and saw the figure standing in the middle of the alley, back turned. Harold's heart pounded in his chest. He crept closer, raising the pipe, ready to strike. "Why are you doing this?" he shouted, his voice filled with a mix of fear and anger. The figure turned slowly, and Harold was met with a chilling smile. Because, the figure said in a low, haunting voice, "It's fun." Harold swung the pipe with all his might, but the figure was fast. They dodged the blow and lunged at him, knocking the pipe from his hand. They grappled in the rain, slipping and sliding on the wet pavement. Harold fought with everything he had, driven by a primal need to survive. In the struggle, Harold managed to get hold of the knife he had dropped. With a final, desperate effort, he plunged the knife into the figure's side. The figure gasped, eyes widening in shock and pain. They staggered back, clutching the wound, then collapsed to the ground. Harold stood there, panting, rain mingling with sweat on his face. He watched as the life drained from the figure's eyes. He felt no relief, only a hollow exhaustion. The nightmare was over, but the images would haunt him forever. The storm finally began to pass, the rain slowing to a gentle drizzle. Harold dropped the knife and sank to his knees, the adrenaline leaving his body. He was alive, but forever changed by the events of this rainy night.